Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Need Some Introduction. In today's episode, Sona and I will be breaking down the third episode of the third season of The White Lotus, an episode called, I thought I had this open, The Meaning of Dreams. Sona, do you believe in dream reading?
I am not a huge believer in going down a rabbit hole of dream interpretation and what things can represent other things. But I will say, touching on our prior conversation about severance and my own personal experience with infertility, the anxiety dreams I had during that period of my life did not need a very sophisticated interpreter
Yes.
in order to get to the bottom of what they were about. That was, you always hear this stereotype of people finding themselves in a dream at an exam that they haven't prepared for or a class that they haven't gone to. I constantly had those dreams that I was running late for something, that I had an exam and I hadn't
Yes.
gone to class all semester, that I was not going to graduate on time. And that's the only period of my life where I have ever regularly had those dreams. So I do think that the anxieties and stresses you have in your everyday life do come across in your dreams. But I'm not one for like, when you see an elephant in your dream, it means that you feel you're a strong person, or I don't know. I'm really making this up. But like that level of dream analysis, I've never really been into. How about you?
I also do not believe that in any of those complex, particular symbolic readings, although there's probably some credence to it. I think symbols do mean things in our minds. I don't know how much value there is in that, but 100% what you're saying when I am stressed out. And other than that, I usually have my memorable dreams. I have dreams all the time, but not ones that I really remember. Usually it is frightening dreams, which is usually me being a fan of horror, trying to work out some actual horror plot. And I'll wake up in the morning and be like, that was a pretty good idea. Let me write that down.
You know what's the worst? I don't know if this has ever happened to you when you're so stressed out about work, but it doesn't translate to anything in your dream. It's a literal dream
Mm-hmm.
about work. You
Oh,
just, you can't even get away from it in your dreams. You literally dream you're at work, stressed out about the same things.
those are the worst dreams. I used to speak in public sometimes in large crowds as part of my job. And I had a dream of giving a tedious tech presentation and it went really badly in Las Vegas. And
Oh.
then I woke up and had to give a presentation in Las Vegas. I was like, oh my God, I thought I did this already. This is
It's
the
like there's
worst.
no escape.
It's severance. It literally is severance where it's just like, oh God, again, it's 100% tedium. Those are the worst dreams for sure. I would rather be chased by an axe murderer. At least it will be a change of pace. A couple of things. I don't want to talk about the Academy Awards too much, but I do want to mention Anora, which is my second favorite movie of the year. I loved it. There's an episode. I've already seen the downloads this morning. People have already downloaded that episode. Probably just people curious about the film or have seen the film. And I wanted to bring it up for a couple of reasons. The one is, of course, the conversation. The second is it's a really great film, so everybody should see it. You can rent it. But more importantly, Sona, this is for you as well. It's premiering on Hulu in about a week and a half. So
Fantastic.
everybody should watch it, and then everybody should listen to our podcast about it. Well, me and my sister. Sona has not watched it yet. But Sona, maybe we do talk about it because it's a great film. And it's rare that I actually say, oh, the film that won the best picture deserved it or something. Happy to see it win so many awards, by the way.
Yeah, I know you really loved it.
And Sean Baker, by the way, from New Jersey, director, editor, writer of this film. He won 4 Academy Awards, all 4 that he was nominated for. So
And it was his mother's birthday
and his
yesterday.
mother's birthday as well.
What
Yeah.
a day.
And Mikey Madison, a shock. I was actually have to say that I do think she gives a better performance over Demi Moore. But, we grew up in an era watching Demi Moore grow up. And I really did want to see her do this victory lap. Although I was so happy to see Mikey Madison, who's just extraordinary in Anora. But usually they don't give it to the ingenue. They usually give it to someone who may be, having, Demi Moore's still relatively young. I mean, she can have other great performances, but, this is maybe her best chance to get another nomination for some period of time.
Right.
And she looked beautiful in the audience, of course.
She did.
Too bad she didn't win. And I do hope that this should open doors for her. This film was a commercial success, a big commercial success, especially overseas. Someone's going to cast her in something. And I do hope that she gets another chance to have a performance like this. But, it was very interesting that I was simultaneously really rooting for her and then really happy that Mikey Madison won. So anyway, but just to speak to the fact that there was probably some wave of love for Anora, and well-deserved. What an incredible film. Completely self-financed, completely shot in New York City with a very small crew running around shooting this movie over the course of a month or so. Really not the type of film that Hollywood usually rewards. The best film doesn't usually always win. And out of this batch, this was the best, I think. So congratulations to everybody. And yeah, once again, it's on Hulu in a couple of weeks. Maybe they anticipated this win. Anything else you want to say about the Academy Awards?
No, as we discussed previously, I'm not super into them. I just happened to catch the last half hour or so because my husband put it on. So everything I saw was just coincidental and not really purposeful.
I was going to ask you about Conan's opening monologue, which I thought was very funny. So, but anyway,
he's a funny guy. I like him a lot.
Yeah, he's very much our generation as well. He kind of came up with him, right? As that awkward. People couldn't believe this. They put this person on TV at all. And look at him now, hosting the Academy Awards. It only took him 50 years to make it.
Yeah, he's had a long career.
Exactly. Okay, I rewatched last week's episode with my wife. My wife had not seen it. So a couple of days after we recorded, I watched it with her. And I wanted to mention a few things that I noticed that I wanted to correct myself about.
Well, let me correct that I think I called Piper Victoria for a good chunk of time. And now I understand that Victoria is the mom. And
Victoria is the mom, daughter. Yes. And I didn't catch that in the edit.
Well, hopefully the context made it clear enough. We were talking about the family structure.
Yes. A couple of things I wanted to correct on my own mention last week. You had mentioned that I hope they bring up those hammocks where people don't waterboard themselves. And of course, sitting there, I hadn't thought about this, but sitting there watching it with my wife, the opening shot of last week's episode, Sona, is these men on pontoons or these small rafts. They are actually going over to the hammocks and they are winding them up, like actually raising them and lowering them. So they raise them and lower them with the water, just squaring that circle, because anybody who watched the episode after we discussed it would have pointed to that as well.
Can you imagine at the hotel? It's like, time to bring up the hammocks so these dumb Americans don't accidentally drown themselves.
Also, I guess, depending on the water level, it makes them usable all day long. So I guess someone's got to maintain them. The second thing I want to point out is I mentioned in our conversation that Leslie Bibbs' character, that she seemed to be like, maybe she's the innocent one who's being pulled in. And in rewatching those episodes, she's actually the one who starts some of the bad mouthing early on. So I feel like maybe she's a little more negative in character. So maybe she's getting a little bit of a comeuppance this week, and we'll get into that dynamic this week.
Yeah, I think they're all equally culpable.
Yeah, I just wanted to point that out, that I kind of felt like maybe she was the one who's being pulled in the triangle. And I'm like, no, I feel like they're all equally toxic or noxious to each other.
That's their dynamic. Yeah,
exactly. Oh, and I wanted to say two things about Walton Goggins, not to shame this guy for his appearance, because he's one of my favorite character actors. I always look forward to him in everything, ever since Justified, such a great villain in that show, a very complex character. So I've always been a big fan of his. He's the best thing on the Fallout sci-fi show. That's a huge hit on Amazon Prime. He's my favorite part of that show as well. So anyway, a big fan of his, but I did want to mention a couple of things. In my description of him, I said, this guy's pushing 60 and he's still holding it together. So this guy's 53 years old. So I do want to say, maybe not holding it together as well as I expected. And second of all, I'm like, I don't think this guy's going bald. And then, of course, once again, rewatching this with my wife, there's a shot from behind when he's rejecting that therapy session. And he clearly has a bald spot in the back. So he is lying that he's not going bald. He is definitely going bald. Chelsea has got him dead to rights on that one.
Yeah, it's interesting what a big difference gray hair and a receding hairline and all of that can make on the impression you have of how old somebody is sometimes. And
one last point is, you haven't watched the show, but Paradise, as we're coming to a conclusion tomorrow, by the way, we'll be discussing it here on the podcast. On Paradise, I was looking up James Marsden's age because all his music references, and he's always dropping music trivia on that show, is all from like the early to mid 80s. I'm like, how old is this guy? So I looked him up, Sona, and he is also exactly 53 years old. So I was talking about how great Walton Goggins is doing, holding it together.
But
I'm
compared
sorry.
to James
James Marsden is doing it way better than Walter Goggins. Gotta say, Walton Goggins, by the way. One more correction I want to make. I keep calling him Walter. My mistake. It's Walton. And I know that, but I just say Walter, accidentally. I'm sure many people do that actually, but Walton. But yeah, maybe Walton, if you're listening to this, I'm sure you're not. Maybe that's so much time in the sun.
I feel like many times last week, for some reason, I saw that same photo of him with the blazer with the no shirt underneath,
Yeah.
showing off the six-pack abs. So he's got something going on in the pop culture zeitgeist where everyone is admiring his physique.
Oh, I mean, he's in great shape. There's no doubt about that. By the way, one more random thing I thought of because they were advertising it on HBO before the episode started. But do you recall that Jason Isaacs, who plays Tim, the father in that family, is Malfoy, in the Harry Potter films, the father.
I did not recall it at all, but I did see a reference to it somewhere. So I knew, but not of my own volition.
Lucius Malfoy. So I was just like, oh my God, that's Lucius Malfoy. I forgot. He has the big white wig in that film, but just, he's been in 100 things, but obviously that one. They were advertising the Harry Potter films as part of one of the ads on my Max app. And I'm like, oh my God, it's the same guy. I forgot. All right. Speaking of dreams, maybe not coincidentally, maybe this is still probably my least favorite part of the show. I hate to say it, but this time let's talk about the family.
Okay, you know what? The parents have really grown on me. I think I always have liked the dad. And now I said I've always had a fondness for Parker Posey, so I could never be really against her, but I like her too. I like them. The kids, not so much, but I'm into the parents.
I also think that even though this is still my least favorite part of the show, I do think that they're adding some interesting elements to the dynamic here to everybody. But I agree, the parents are the ones that I'm connecting to the most. So Victoria wakes up. She's having this dream. Of course, famously, there was a huge tsunami in this area.
My gosh, yes.
Like the Christmas tsunami. And we discussed the tsunami-like event in the show Paradise. Darren was speaking of the same thing, recollecting the actual real world events. And we talked about this movie. Sona, have you ever seen this movie called The Impossible? It's about the tsunami. It's actually based on a true family. It's actually a Portuguese family, although it's played by Naomi Watts. Just doesn't look Portuguese at all.
I think I did see it, but a very long time ago.
But I just thinking about how terrifying
so terrifying.
The
Holy
idea
cow.
of being in the tsunami and what we mentioned there, which is not represented here in this show, but we just thought about what I had totally not thought about was the fact that when the tsunami comes in, many people survive that wave. It is actually when the water goes back out and it brings with it all the debris that most people are actually killed. That was just terrifying. Just how convincingly it was created in that film. It was pretty shocking. But
remember that one model who hung onto a tree for like a full day?
It's insane, right? Yeah, exactly. It's
Crazy.
incredible. We do see, speaking of tsunamis, Victoria, obviously, speaking about having stress in your life and how that manifests itself in your dreams, she's overhearing this conversation. In her dream, she sees, it's a pretty clear symbolism here, she sees their home, their North Carolina home, on a beach, and a tsunami is coming, of course, to wash it all away, because at that very moment, her husband's on the phone talking to his lawyer, laying out in bits and pieces that we can hear here, this whole entire scam that's coming to potentially wash away everything in the family. What'd you think about this intro? What'd you think about Victoria? What'd you think about the dad's potential slipping back into maybe a previous drug dependency?
I personally, from the start, have been really enjoying this storyline with the father. I get the sense it's not the most popular out there, but for whatever reason, I like it. And I like this actor a lot. I think he's doing a great job playing this type of guy.
What do you think of his accent? There's been some controversy about his accent.
You know what? This is where I'm a little bit tone deaf, so unless something is really awful and really off, or accents are switching in and out, I don't notice much. So I have no problem with it. I like that they've developed this so that she has some idea what's going on rather than the whole family being completely clueless that she knows something is up. I like that. And I'm interested in seeing how it plays out a little bit more. The whole thing with the dream, I don't love the stuff where I'm seeing somebody else's dream generally. I'm just not that interested in it. But for what it indicates, yeah, I like that.
Yeah, I think they wanted to use it as an excuse to have that correlation later, and they want to talk about the mystical interpretations of things versus more concrete, maybe a Western and Eastern view of things. So I think they want that to use as an excuse. But I agree with you. I think if they had never brought up any of the dream logic conversation later, I just like the visual of her waking up hearing this conversation.
Right. Agree.
Because we've all had that experience where the outside world, even in your sleep, you can't escape, and you wake up from some kind of terrifying event in the dream only into the nightmarish reality of your world.
Totally agree. And yes, they are trying to tie through this tsunami theme, right? Because later it comes up with the video. I think it's Lachlan is showing. So they're going for something here. It's just that part of it was not my favorite.
It is maybe an important symbol of what's happening in the family. So a couple of things. You mentioned it later on, Lachlan, and apparently they've been watching these videos because she says, maybe I'll have to watch fewer of those videos before I go to sleep, which indicates that this isn't the first time that either Lachlan or someone else has been looking at these tsunamis. So maybe they're in Thailand and they have Googled this, or maybe one of the kids said,
hey, they said it happened on the next beach over. I mean, this is literally the last thing you find me doing on vacation is looking at videos of an absolutely horrifying event that happened just yards away from me.
Ways you could die in this very location. Yeah, definitely not what I want to be looking at. It's like going on safari and watching, tiger,
right? People being
attacks.
mauled. Yeah,
exactly. Not what I'm going to be doing with my time.
Yeah, full on denial for me that anything could possibly go wrong in this beautiful place.
But that's really what I wanted to circle back to. So what do you think it indicates here? First of all, seeing that man on the beach, standing there, being washed away by the tsunami and just accepting it, not even running away. They make a reference to that. And also maybe that's one extreme of this metaphor. But then the other side of it, of her and her dream and her telling her husband, oh, you know what you need to take? You just need to take some lorazepam. It'll help you sleep. Is this just a symbolically Victoria in her life, her day-to-day life, where she is aware of these things? They're on the periphery and she just doesn't want to know too much and she just checks out. Is that kind of how you read some of this?
I think that is probably very true. I guess what I was more focused on was the aspect in the video of, as you mentioned, Lachlan remarks he doesn't even try and run away.
Right.
This idea that something awful is coming and it is so unavoidable that it's going to overtake you, that there's just no point in even trying to escape it. So that was really more my focus, but I think you're making a good point.
These are two separate symbolic elements we're seeing, but I agree with that. If anything, him standing on the beach and being hit by the tsunami and accepting the fact is maybe foreshadowing for what is going to happen with the family itself. Because when the father's like, I don't want my family to know about this, let's get rid of all of our electronic devices. And now he thinks, okay, good, they are not going to find out. But then when he has to kind of sacrifice his phone and then kind of spends the rest of the day just drugged out. And if you saw the scenes for next week, it looks like this is going to accelerate even more so.
I don't want to laugh at an addiction issue, but it was edited in a really humorous way, the scenes for next week.
Yes, they were very funny. Just the way they kind of compounded one on top of the other.
Yes.
That becomes a metaphor for him with this imminent wave coming and him just resigning himself to it because he knows it is inevitable. And this circles back to something we mentioned last week where I felt like he was minimizing this, saying that it didn't even make me that much money, only $10 million. And it kind of sounded like this isn't legitimately true, that he really needs those $10 million. And I think we circle back to that today in this episode as well, because the reality is if he's a billionaire, for example, and he gets caught dead to rights, he can pay a lawyer to bury this. He can pay a fine. He could pay the money back and say, I didn't even know what was going on. You can imagine that he's not in that position. He knows that if anyone starts to dig under the surface, he doesn't have the assets to pay this money back. And money heals most things. If you ripped somebody off for $10 million and you pay them back $10 million, they're usually okay with that, you know, especially if you throw another million on top of it. He's not as wealthy as he presents himself to be, I would assume.
I mean, also, though, once the FBI is involved, you probably are going to do some kind of jail time.
Oh, really?
Depends who you are. But, you know, a country club type, Martha Stewart situation.
Yeah.
Learn to knit ponchos, you know.
Did you watch the Martha Stewart documentary, by the way?
No, I didn't.
I recommend it. And man, when you see that case in retrospect, she
got screwed.
She was so screwed. That was crazy. Yeah. It's a very good documentary, by the way. I do recommend.
Once again, men can get away with a million times what a woman can get away with.
Unfortunately, that particular scenario, absolutely true.
Yeah.
That there's no way that a powerful man would have. We might as well round up the rest of the kids. Piper is now just tentatively starting to maybe explore what she supposedly was there to do. Saxon, Chloe, after saying cute last week, seems to be making a move on Saxon. Saxon's obviously up for it, at least so far. How do you think that Greg is dealing with this? I can't figure out what their dynamic is, whether Greg would be
unclear.
Actually possessive with her, even though this seems to be completely transactional.
I mean, we had reason to believe last season that Greg is gay, didn't we? Or was it that they could never be together because he was straight? Do you remember how that turned out?
It's not clearly stated, but apparently the character in season 2, spoilers for season 2, the White Lotus, by the way, jump ahead about a minute if you don't want to hear this. I assume everybody's seen this, but just in case. The implication there was that he had strung this guy along and that they had never been together, or you know, maybe
because
something,
he's straight.
Right. Maybe something had happened between them at some point, but that they had never been together for that reason, or not committed to each other in any way. But yeah, that was the implication, was that they never had a relationship.
Regardless of whether he is straight or gay, the dynamic between him and Chloe is very unclear to me. I will say, given what happened last season, if I liked Saxon more, I would be a little worried for him being close to Chloe in case Gary is the possessive type. You know, we know he isn't one to shy away from violence.
Belinda might be in danger as well.
And Belinda, I am worried about because I do like her character. So yeah, hard to say how this will play out. This is another place where the previews for next week looked very interesting. Yeah. I'm curious to see how it will develop.
What did you think about Lachlan's reaction to going to his session for his posture?
I did not know posture correction sessions were a thing that could be offered. I would sign up for that in a heartbeat. I have historically horrific posture. I thought it was really interesting that this is even a thing. I love the idea that the family signed him up for this without him knowing. Which is kind of like, we've decided. A lot
of people seem to be signed up for things that they're not fully on board for.
It's just what everyone has decided needs to be worked on. And then the idea of the feminine energy, and we've been talking about perhaps he's in the closet. So I think they're beginning to tease out that plot a little bit more. What were your thoughts?
In general, I think that he is just so closed off, and maybe because he's closeted, that is maybe just one aspect of him not knowing how to define himself, right? Like you see him again in this episode torn by his brother's influence and his sister's influence. There's the whole idea of like, well, you're shielding yourself with your feminine side, and then you have this masculine and feminine representations of his persona in his own siblings. So maybe that's what we're seeing like manifest on the show as well.
He says, oh, well, there are a lot of big personalities in my family.
Yes.
Maybe it's just the people I'm around or the New York, New Jersey brashness that I'm accustomed to. I don't see them as particularly big personalities. I mean, they have personalities, but not in a way that I would think, oh, this is going to completely keep a person from expressing themselves and developing their own sense of self.
I think that's an interesting point you make, because I think that speaks more to how he is
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
closed in. Exactly
Right.
that. Because yes, Saxon is obviously always performing. And if he's in
But
the
it's
room,
like a one note thing,
yes,
like it
exactly.
is what it is. And then you become accustomed to it.
And he's not like legitimately anything intentionally here. The performance is actually good in this way, as it irritates me because that's this intention, right? He is, what do they call him? A douche. Right? Isn't
Yes.
that what Chelsea goes? Oh, I hear you're a douche.
Hmm.
And at least he laughs at this, which is, maybe speaks to him a little bit, being a little more self-aware than he seems to be. He, in like a New York, New Jersey type area, this would be somebody who is going to be 100 in a room. He's not going to stand out,
Right.
as opposed to someone has real charisma.
Yes.
Maybe he, in this place where everyone's being polite and you're at a
Maybe.
resort,
Yeah.
he gets to be like the stereotypical loud American tourist, and that makes him stand out. And in that regard, he's looking at him in that way. And Piper also, the fact that he sees her as a big personality, it's not even that she is loud and abrasive. She simply is self-aware and self-confident. And that in and of itself makes him feel small. It's just strange.
She probably doesn't like the typical things that someone of her demographic would
Right.
like or be interested in. But to me, that's not the same as big personality. Like big personality to me is like at the exchanges that then other people feel small. And I don't
Right.
get that from her.
In a way, it's just his own intimidation by the fact that she seems
Yeah,
to be more self-possessed, and that's it.
I agree.
Let's talk about the three ladies here. A few interesting aspects. I think we've all had this experience where you come up with people in your social circle, and then it's not always political. It could be other things as well. It could be religion also, where you suddenly see somebody is much more religious than you expected them to be. You spend some time apart, and obviously they're living their lives, you're living your lives. Then when you're together again, you just assume you're all on the same page on things. And apparently you're not. Living in Texas can make you more conservative. Surprise, surprise, surprise. What'd you think about the dynamic here between the three ladies?
I might be in the minority. I really like these three. I'm entertained by them. I found it very satisfying that what we predicted would happen, that like it's just different combinations of them talking behind the other's back. And it's
Right,
just a
right.
matter of whose turn it is. If you split off from the group early, it's going to be your turn. So try and stay up until the end. I like that. I agree with you. Sometimes we become so entrenched in our political beliefs or morals that when you hear someone talk with such conviction about a position that makes no sense to you, that you think is absolutely bananas, it seems completely unhinged and divorced from reality because you so deeply believe what you believe, it hasn't occurred to you that anyone else could believe differently. It makes so much sense to you to believe what you believe. I think we've all had that experience, and then having it come from a close friend or someone you consider a close friend who you think you know so well, it turns your whole perception of them upside down. You thought you were so similar, but you couldn't possibly be so similar to somebody who believes something that's in direct contravention to what you believe. It really makes you start questioning how much you even know that person.
I think a commentary that Mike White might be making as well, where they're branding her a particular way based on the vote she casted. And I always think that is kind of a mistake that people make over and over again. It's not only about who you voted for, but there's the why of it. They don't choose to even get into the why of it. They're reading a lot into the person she is or has become, or their motivations for her vote. Has she always seemed to just go with whoever she was dating, on their political beliefs, even when she was younger. Oh, it's so her that she would flip-flop her political affiliation, for example. So I feel like a lot of that is being critiqued, that maybe there's an overread on this. And then, of course, it only makes the person more defensive in, stating any kind of disagreement. But I do agree, just in general, with you that there are sometimes when people are, for example, have become extremely religious when you meet them. It actually made me think about, like, I think about all these shows in tandem, but I think about Irv showing up at Bert's house in uh, Severance, and they go off on this like this religious diatribe, which I'm pretty sure he did not expect to see, and he's just like, "Wow." And sometimes you're just caught up in this conversation where you're like, I really don't know what to say in this circumstance. So, but yeah, I do think that there's a little two sides of this. One is showing that she has different political, cultural loyalties than she had when these girls were younger. And of course, they are not the same people they were the last time they saw each other. But I also think that there is the potential for an overread based on one data point and the politics of all things, and maybe religion as well, by the way, because she also speaks about her religious practices now. You tend to pigeonhole people based on those things.
I understand your point, and I don't want to get too political, especially because we've been accused of being too political, which is
I know,
strange.
right? I know.
I will just say with this particular choice, I think there is a very popular viewpoint that I will not take a position on, that making the particular choice she did does tell you something about who you are as a person. But that is not true in the general world of politics.
I agree. Yeah. I mean, it is kind of shocking to me. I used to have many political conversations, and now I do not, because everything is so personality driven. I remember arguing a conservative point of view oftentimes in the past, in the idea of like, well, is bigger government better for something? Is smaller government better for something? Or we're talking about like tax rates and maybe some hard lines on certain foreign policy. And the idea that, do you believe in facts, but do you not believe in facts, is now like what we argue about.
Mhm.
And maybe that is what's being touched on here. The, exactly that like, this is maybe indicative in the show, but also in the culture, that it basically has become a very toxic conversation, which they try to avoid, but I think they've kind of opened that can of worms.
It's hard once you start down that path.
Exactly. It's very hard to turn back around,
Yeah.
turn that boat around. What do you think that they're trying to indicate with this? I mean, we obviously are seeing more of the same thing based on last week, just a progression of this. Also, of course, we want to bring up the fact that there is this pushing of Lori into having a flirtation minimally and maybe an actual hookup with Valentine. But now the girls seem to be competing. How do you think that's going to play out?
Well, she's the only single one, right? Yeah, Lori is the only single one. I think they're being playful. I think it's a little bit of a stereotype of like the middle-aged woman on vacation wanting to flirt with the handsome guys. I don't think there's too much behind it because they are encouraging her to go for it because they can. I think they're just all having fun. I'm not reading too much into that.
But yeah, that's what I'm curious if they're going to cross a line because let's say that Lori does pique his interest. Do then they start to get competitive over them?
See, I'm not seeing it that way. I could be wrong. I think it's like you had your chance, you didn't want to do it, so now here I am. Like they've tried to let her go first, she just didn't want to.
That's true. That's true.
That I'm not reading too much into. And honestly, even the political thing, like that's just her thing, what they're picking on of each person, right?
Yes.
Like for Jacqueline, it's that she's so invested in her appearance. What has she done to herself? And also, what's up with this marriage that she claims is so perfect? With Lori, it's like what is going on in her home life. Her daughter is a little bit off the rails, and she didn't get that promotion either, I don't think. So I think this is just the thing for Kate, but I'm not reading more into it beyond that.
Yeah, I don't even think that they're going to push on the political thing. There might be another conversation where Kate critiques them for judging her too harshly or something, but I don't think it's going to be a big part of the show. I agree. I've had friends like this, and I'm sure you have too, but do you ever have had that experience where you know somebody and they all of a sudden start dating somebody new, and all of a sudden the music they're into, the places they like to hang out, the activities they like to do suddenly start to change significantly? I mean, obviously you start dating someone and they like to bike a lot. So, you might bike some more and you might even think, oh, that's a good thing and some more activity for me. But have you seen where people change some fundamental aspects of their personality depending on who they date?
I totally understand what you mean. And I think, yes, people do that. And the younger they are, the more likely they are to do that. But then I also think sometimes you date someone who just expands your horizons and exposes you to other things and makes you see things differently, or you find things fun because they find it fun, even though you wouldn't have thought so before. I think there's a big gray area there between like adopting your significant other's personality
Yeah.
and just broadening your own horizons. I've definitely seen a lot of people that broaden their horizons. I probably haven't seen that many that like kind of morph into a whole other person than who they were. Have you?
Yeah, I think I have a more negative perspective on that. Like you mentioned, I think that that's like the pleasure of dating somebody, right? Is
Right.
like, having a different aspects of yourself revealed in that relationship. So I think that that is what you date people for. You may discover you like something, but you never knew you did because you never, listened to that style of music or tried that type of food or whatever it happens to be. An element of self-discovery. I think where I get cynical about it is when you see somebody who will have like a particular set of beliefs that they are really strongly in favor of in one relationship and then be contradictory to that in the next relationship. Are they just simply adapting to who they're around rather than, experimenting with different aspects of themselves?
There's a big difference between I didn't used to like punk music and now I
Right.
do.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to be pro-choice and
Believe
now
in
I'm
civil
pro-life.
rights.
Right? Like,
Now I don't.
now I think segregation is good, actually.
Right. So do you think that they're, given the context of this show, do you think they're being overly cruel in their judgment of Kate? Or maybe they misread her. Maybe she was more conservative when she was younger and they just simply never even bothered asking her.
I think they are trying to figure out from their conversation, from what I could understand of it, that like, is she just going along with this because her husband's doing it and she never really was
Right.
one to think for herself? Or is there something deeper? But I also think it's probably easier to flip-flop your position on things that don't personally affect you because it just seems like an intellectual exercise than things that do. And she lives a life of privilege of a certain type. Maybe they're just also kind of calling her anti-intellectual in a way,
Yes, of course. Yeah.
right? Saying like you haven't really even thought about this, you're just going along. I think it kind of go cut a few different ways, and those ways can all be consistent with each other.
Do you think there's anything to this? We saw Jacqueline and Kate speak behind Laurie's back. And then we saw Kate and Laurie speak behind Jacqueline's back.
Mm-hmm.
But then when they're talking about Kate, we're not in the room. Do you think the show is aligning us with Kate? That did stand out to me. We're not hearing the conversation they're having behind Kate's back. We are Kate in that point of view. And in the previous examples, of course, we heard the conversations because Kate was in the room. Do you think that the show's maybe aligning us more with her intentionally?
That's an interesting point, and I hadn't thought about it. Probably because I watched this with the captioning on,
Right. And you could hear everything they're saying in the captions.
yeah,
Right?
the captioning was there for the entire conversation. But I do think there is a similarity in the perspectives because we did see Jacqueline
Right.
upstairs
Overhearing. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
while the girls were talking, the other ladies were talking downstairs. And then we saw Lori outside the glass door
Right.
while they were talking about her inside the glass door. So I feel like maybe it's consistent, but I'm not paying attention to the clarity of the sound of the conversations because I always have the captions on.
Yeah. I think that was a differentiator here that you can hear the conversation in the other room, whereas the other ones, in the other instances, we were truly outsiders.
Yeah.
So maybe that is giving us
Interesting.
both perspectives because they're letting us hear that she is hearing the conversation.
Interesting.
Maybe the dynamic is changing just as it is between the three women.
I mean, it's definitely a merry-go-round of who's talking about who, and tonight was her turn.
What can we say about the workers there? We see Guy talk. I guess he's pretty important in this episode as well. They're mocking him for getting beat up.
Yeah,
He thought he was
sad.
heroic, but now he hears, and I think we see a snippet of this, that potentially he's in for a conversation. I don't think he's going to actually get fired, by the way. I think something's
I don't think so either.
But they seem to be having the conversation next week. They don't see what he did as heroic, that, he did not intervene enough somehow, even though he was not armed. So he seemed like he went above and beyond, but apparently they don't think he did a good enough
I'm
job.
assuming it was the primary thing of letting the people go by him to begin with.
True, that's a good point. Yeah, it makes me wonder about who he saw coming out of out of the car, because I thought it could be one of the other guys, one of the other people who work there, who he would recognize by face. And then I also thought maybe these are the security guards that are actually also the thieves, and he recognized them. But it seems that they wouldn't be here mocking him if that was the case. That would be, they probably wouldn't want not to get a lot of FaceTime with him after the fact, especially not to egg him on to be like, hey, you know, I know who did it. He's right outside the door. So yeah, but he's reading this the wrong way. But maybe he does end up getting that Bangkok bodyguard position, because it seems to be the reason that he's still around is because Shritala, I'm now going to mispronounce it after she tried to coach the other guy how to speak it. She seems to be a fan of his. Maybe he is protected to some extent, but they are obviously making this point. And he goes on a little bit of a roller coaster ride. He's thinking, oh, I could get a promotion. Maybe this will appeal to Mook and she'll want to leave with me. And then by the end, they're like, actually, they're thinking of firing you. And you're lucky to even have your job right now.
Harsh.
Anything else on the employee side? They're developing Valentin a little bit. He's from Russia. He left before the war. He's got a tattoo of a boat on his leg, which the girls seem very interested in.
I think they're interested in everything about him.
Exactly. Just seeing a little more of his thigh is just the part of the appeal.
Yeah. I don't know. I felt for Guy Talk in this episode. It was hard to watch. Yeah. I felt it was actually hard to watch.
Fabian is still trying to, or Fabian, as he calls himself, is trying to continue to impress his boss. She doesn't seem to be that interested in him. I'm not very interested in this character. And like I said, maybe I have my own expectations here, but this really was maybe the most entertaining character that, you know, correlating to the head of a staff in these previous 2 seasons of the show. So if I had that expectation, pretty disappointed so far.
Yeah, the character isn't doing much to hook me.
Anything important that happens with Mook other than her conversations with Guy Talk? She doesn't have a big episode this week, right?
Yeah, not that I really noticed, just that, you know, she's keeping hope alive for Guy Talk.
Perhaps. Let's talk about Belinda. So a few things with Belinda. She had her chance. She missed it. Do you think Porn Chai was making a move there at the end? That she could have invited him in? I mean, she definitely could have invited him in, right?
He had to be that line about the dreams, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you don't just say that to somebody.
She doesn't seem to get like the full implications of that until after he walks away. So it's like,
and he walks away mumbling, tipsy, tipsy, tipsy. So I'm rooting for them. I like them.
That was her chance to get him on her stomach, but it didn't work out. But yeah, I think that it's still going to happen.
I did think the dinner conversation between the two of them was interesting. She's explaining what happened in Maui.
Mm-hmm.
I think he was trying to relate to her. So everything she was saying, he was just agreeing with, like, sure, who among us has not met a rich woman who screwed us over by promising us a business and then marrying some random guy and taking off? I hate it when that happens. He was so unfazed by everything she's saying. Just, oh man, so annoying.
He's missing the bigger picture. But I mean, who would expect, you know, the full context of that? She doesn't even know the full context of that yet.
Yeah, it was just funny to me how he just went along with the story. Didn't ask any questions.
Right.
Like, sure, you hear about it all the time. That's the type of thing that happens.
People make a lot of promises. She seems to be doing some additional investigation next week, and I want to get the timeline straight, although I think they're just based on the teaser for next week. I won't get into it here in case people didn't watch it. The timelines here of what's happening is getting a little clearer. Mm-hmm. It is interesting, though, that she mentions, and maybe I had assumed that the gap between season 1 and season 2 were further apart, because she's talking about like, oh, I was very close with my manager and he died in this freak accident. So of course we witnessed that in season 1 of the show, and she's still haunted by this. So it doesn't feel like this is 2-3 years later. It seems like this is relatively recent. I guess we'll have more clarity on exactly how much time has passed.
I mean, it was also a nice summary for those that did not watch the first few
want to remember. Yes, good point.
Just a quick recap.
So that's her perspective on things, although obviously we haven't seen all the details yet. What do you think of Chloe's version of the story, given what Greg has told her, or Gary?
So crazy. I mean, definitely a lot of imagery in this episode of things disappearing into the sea.
Yes.
But so I think it touches on that. But yes, of course, as she's telling the story, you necessarily visualize the Jennifer Coolidge character
Yes.
wading into the ocean and then there only being her leg left.
Did you only found her leg in the end?
Oh my gosh, so silly.
Yeah, and it looks like we'll know a lot more, or everybody, well, not everybody, but many people will know a lot more about what's happening in that situation. And that he's on the lam.
What did you think of when Belinda actually goes over to Gary slash Greg
Oh yeah, of course.
and confronts him? Maybe confronts is a strong word, but says, "Hey, I recognize you," essentially, and he plays it off.
I think that is where I'm so concerned about her. He can just play it off if he wants to, but this is going to raise suspicions with his girlfriend, of course. She's a transactional partner, something piece of information he obviously doesn't want her to know. More importantly, is he's there, probably there for some nefarious reasons. Belinda now is going to call someone at the White Lotus in Honolulu, get a last name, Google it, and man, there's going to be a whole bunch of information coming back as soon as she Googles that. Here he is, kind of trapped by his circumstance.
It was also kind of a fun, different version of the conversation Kate has with Victoria of like, "Hey, I know you from someplace." No, you don't.
Oh, right.
But
Yes.
Belinda handled it much more smoothly
Yes.
than
Yes.
Kate, right? Where like, "Okay, this isn't going anywhere. I will excuse myself gracefully." Even though I know this isn't quite right. Whereas Kate just stood there trying to sort it out while she stood there.
This is what's interesting in the show and the way Mike White writes these shows. And it's starting to develop here in the third episode. I think it's been a little slower than we've seen previously. I do like the fact that he does create all of these mirroring effects. So you have the Leslie Bibbs conversation with Victoria getting blown off. And then you see how Belinda handles it here. And she pushes a little bit more and intentionally is dropping breadcrumbs. For example, you notice that Chloe's very interested in, oh, Gary, take note of that. So, she's about to do some investigation for this very shady person, of course, that she's with. She wants to know more. And maybe we'll go and talk to Belinda about all of this later on, track her down. Of course, we're seeing the dynamic between the three women. We're seeing the dynamic shift between Lachlan and his siblings. And of course, the mirroring, once again, we'll get to it in a moment, but the mirroring between Greg and Chloe and Chelsea and
Rick.
Rick.
I'm finally getting it. Third episode in, I'm finally starting to
You're getting the names. Now I'm losing them and you're getting them. It's interesting how you start seeing people in the same circumstances reacting differently. And that's kind of what the themes of the show is, that people in a different context, limbo in these resorts. All of this is starting to coalesce a little bit more. But as far as your question, yeah, I worry. I think she handled it really well. She seems to be a very curious person. She can't let something lay, although not clever enough to find out when someone's hitting on her. That could just be something to do with her self-esteem, perhaps, as well.
I've been there.
And we should mention here, because it's definitely going to be the catalyst for the next episode, Greg apparently has a boat, or pretends to, maybe he just rented it, who knows, but he has some luxurious yacht. This may be part of some scam he's trying to pull, trying to lure these rich people onto his yacht to play some kind of game. Who knows exactly what his agenda is yet fully. Apparently, they've invited a bunch of the guests. And is it possible that Belinda gets invited onto that boat? And if she is, could be putting her at risk.
Well, we know what happened last time. Greg was involved with a boat.
The boats and Greg, not a good combination. Maybe he's always hatching a scheme with a boat.
Maybe. First of all, I want to say there was so much information packed into the preview for next week.
Oh my God, a lot. Yes.
I'm really excited about it, but it does seem like half the resort is on this boat.
It's got to be a big, that's why I said it has to be a big boat. Yeah. He's invited a lot of people on this boat. All right, so let's talk about that mirror couple, which of course is the heart and soul of this episode, or maybe of this entire season, is the battle. Maybe that's the theme of this whole thing. It's the battle for Rick's soul in a lot of ways. His toxic childhood and his detachment from everybody has made him this person that he is. And maybe Chelsea, this almost naively single-minded person who is wise in her own way, is maybe trying to ground him and maybe keep him away from his worst impulses. He goes for another therapy session and it doesn't go well. Again, he's still running away from his demons. He definitely needs to get high. He's been desperately trying to get his hands on some marijuana, and people, don't get high before you go to the snake show. That's all I got to say.
First, before we get to the snakes,
Yes.
there is another reference to his dad. It does seem like, as you had speculated, maybe something about the reason that he's in Thailand has to do with his dad. And then connecting that with, looking for the hotel owner's husband, and some connection there seems to be happening.
What do you think is going through Chelsea's mind when she sees him all of a sudden turn on the con man and be like, I'm in the movie business. You could be a star. I'm going to fly you to Bangkok. He does a pretty good job of this, of pulling this off. And then, it's almost like he has a headache just trying to act friendly for 5 minutes when he gets back to the table with her. And she's like, what is going on with you? Like, what just happened? How do you think that this whole thing plays out? And she's like shocked to see him over there.
I feel like she's become accustomed to rolling with it, right? Like, they were supposed to be on Australia. Now they're in Thailand. I think she's just kind of like, there he goes again.
But this is part of his plan. He is apparently not going to, well, he might be on the yacht, right? She announced to him, even though he's leaving for Bangkok, that they're going to be on this yacht. So I guess the yacht is tomorrow. Maybe Bangkok is the following day. He's like called somebody in Bangkok, a friend of his, Frank or somebody, he's asking him to set things up there. So maybe to set up some kind of fake meeting or appointment to sell this and hopefully get in the room with the two of them. She brings up the fact that he is so mysterious, a Scorpio, and I to be out in the open, Aries. And he's like, why do you care so much? And she goes, Rick, we're soulmates. And he goes, how can we be soulmates? We don't even have compatible signs. And she does contemplate that for a minute.
Well, you know what? Also, on a different tangent, I shared his dismay at having dinner yet again with Gary / Greg and Chloe. They just had dinner with them the prior night. I also would say, like, how much of this couple do we need to see?
We only have a few days here. Do we have to see them every night? But you know what? She likes hanging out with Chloe. She hangs out with her during the day. So I think that she probably just wants to spend more time.
I guess. I mean, then you go to dinner, you find out you got to be on a boat with these people the next day.
Yes. This is a lot. She's scheduling a lot.
And that's the thing about a boat. You're stuck there, so.
This is going to be a mess next week on the boat. Saxon's going to be on the boat. Chloe's going to be making moves on him, or he's going to make moves on her in front of Greg because he's an idiot. It's possible. So all of that's going to be really bad. Belinda might be there, and Gary / Greg is going to be targeting her and wanting to know what she knows. And I'm glad to see, this show has had very little plot so far. I think next week is going to be very plotty. So it's good.
I agree.
Rick's second session with his therapist or his meditation, briefly, you brought it up already, but the idea that he wants to go to Bangkok and that he can't have what he lost by not having his parents around, not having his father around, who was murdered, but he could still have some kind of closure he asks for, some kind of redemption, which makes me think about the revenge plot. So once again, who is this guy? Did he kill his father? Did he ruin his father's life? He blames this guy for what happened to his dad. And of course, this person presumably is very successful, owns this beautiful resort in Thailand. There's some anger there about the situation. And I know you mentioned there might be a kidney transplant, but I don't think I want an 80-year-old guy's kidney. My kidney's got to be in really bad shape for me to take an 80-year-old kidney.
Fair.
Oh, and then of course, Rick goes into town, gets high.
Oh my gosh. Chelsea's
like, I better go with him. Indeed, she should. I do like Rick showing this sympathy for the snakes. And, of course, there's so many religious references here in this show. And she brings up the fact that, why are you trying to rescue the snakes? Snakes are evil. Didn't you read the Bible? And I like Rick's answer. He says, even if they are, then why be evil to them? It only makes them more evil. And I really feel like Rick is talking about himself, right? That he might not be the nicest person in the world, but why treat bad people really badly? They only get worse.
It's true. That's why you got to kill them with kindness.
Or just kill them. No, I'm just
Ha.
kidding. How do you kill a cobra with kindness?
I have to say, I deserve extra credit for watching this scene directly through because, and not averting my eyes, because snakes are my second biggest fear in the
Really?
whole world. Yes,
Behind death?
exactly.
Well, death and snakes, it's all going to happen, Sona.
Death and snakes.
This is going to really test you.
There were so many snakes. It wasn't just one snake. There were so many
Oh,
snakes.
so many. Exactly. And cobras too. It's not even like, you know what? Like, my daughter just went to a birthday party and the kids love snakes and they had a anaconda. It's like all the kids held it. This is a nightmare for you.
My God. Okay.
There's like 20 kids holding this thing. It's like 20 feet long. And, but it's just a giant muscular creature. I actually am more scared of, for example, a cobra that could be under your sofa or something. You don't know it's there. Unlike an anaconda, which you would know was in the house. You get bit by that and you got to go to the hospital really fast because it'll kill you.
Well, you heard them explain how so many of these snakes are just found in people's houses, including in the toilet.
Exactly. They'll just show up wherever. You're like, they're just wandering around. They get under the door and they're in your house. No wonder you're so scared, Sona.
It's terrifying. They have no arms and legs. It's not normal.
If they just had arms and legs, it would be okay.
I mean, then you've got the forked tongue, and sometimes the tongue is black.
Okay. We won't.
Let's not get into it.
We don't want to traumatize you any further. Anything else you want to talk about Rick and Chelsea about?
Just that I loved the comic relief of all of this, of the snake show, of the announcer in his deadpan. Wow. Over and over as he was like punctuating different events that happened. He would just say, wow. I love the idea of letting all the snakes be free. And he starts and the one won't even leave the tank and he's got to like convince it out. I love Chelsea coming out and being horrified at what has happened. She gets bit and has to be rushed off in the rickshaw. Just all of it I thought was very, very funny.
I'm going to make the antiquated movie reference now. Have you ever seen Pee-wee's Big Adventure?
You know what? Only bits and pieces. I've never seen it all the way through.
He has to rescue all the animals at the end because the pet shop's on fire. And he keeps going back and going, oh, whenever he sees the snakes, because he's afraid of the snakes. And he frees all the other animals. He got some monkey and the monkey frees some of the other animals. And you see like there's birds flying out. Everything's flying out. And finally, last, he goes in for the snakes and he just runs out of the shop with like 8 snakes in his hands. And he just screams and passes out on the sidewalk. Very funny. But it did make me think about him running out with the snakes in his hands. Made me think about Pee-wee. They yell at him.
Anger when they see what he's done. I love all of it. It was all so funny.
Yeah. I like the cleanup though. Like in the background, they don't even make attention. But after like yelling at him and being like, she has to go. She's going to die. She doesn't go to the hospital. And then they just like pick the snakes up off the sand and put it back in the cages. Like that's how far they got. Like what was he going to do? Carry them all where? Where was he going to take them? That was the highlight of the episode for sure. As we mentioned earlier, next week looks very eventful. The boat trip is going to be very eventful. And of course, will Rick actually leave for Bangkok? I wonder if he's going to go to Bangkok because will he be off the show for, if he's gone for 2 days, that means that he's off the show for 2 days, unless we follow him to Bangkok.
Yeah, why couldn't we see what's going on in Bangkok?
But it just seems like they never leave the resort. The POV of the show has never left the resort.
No, they do. In the Maui season, they didn't, which was partly, due to COVID, but it also bothered me in the Maui season that they never made any references to how they had left the resort, even if we didn't see it. Just, we had a great day doing the road to Hana, whatever it may be. In the Italy episode, remember Daphne's like, do you like this villa? I rented it for the night.
Right.
And they have that conversation there and they kind of walk around town. There's a scene in a vineyard as well in Italy, with the family, the dad and son and grandson. So they do leave sometimes. And here they even went into town to do the snake show.
And the island, they take the Jennifer Coolidge character, leaves with those guys, and they spend that whole part of that setup is them spending that weekend out on that island. So yeah, they could. You're good point. You make a very good point. They could leave and follow him, and the storyline could be in parallel. I would be open to that. That would be cool.
Yeah. But what do you think is going on in Belinda's room? Monkey?
Oh, maybe
The
Monkey
final scene? Monkey?
heard something multiple times inside of her villa now, right?
I'm not sure about multiple times. Once was outside, right?
Oh,
And then
right,
she
right.
goes running inside. Could also be her son has arrived.
Could be. Her son's definitely going to arrive. So
Yeah,
it could
we
be.
know he gets there at some point.
Her son would probably announce himself, though, don't you think?
Maybe he doesn't realize she's back,
She's
though.
there.
Maybe he's taking a shower or something.
Or you know what? People just have their AirPods in now.
Also,
Yeah. I've turned around and found my daughter in the house. I'm like, oh, didn't know you were there.
what would his AirPods be connected to? He should have surrendered his cell phone.
Oh, they're not going to turn in their phones, these kids. Oh, something I forgot to bring up all the way in the beginning when Victoria wakes up and she overhears her husband talking about this deal he got brought into and he didn't know what was going on fully. And the name of the company was Shokel. I'm like, Shokel, that's like just Shell Co. rearranged. You should have known right away.
I didn't pick up on
It was
that.
a shell company called Shokel. I'm like, oh, was it called Shellco? Yeah, so that's the episode in a nutshell. Pretty quiet episode. I thought this was a little slow, to be honest, and I did enjoy it, but I do feel like, do we really need an extra episode of this season? Basically, what I'm saying is, other than the highlights here, which I think the snake show was very funny, but other than that, did we really need to hit some of the same beats I felt with the three women, with that North Carolina family? We just kind of hit them all again this episode. Did you really feel that those particular storylines needed that extra space?
I
What
think
did you
it
think?
might not be the tightest storytelling,
Yeah.
but because my favorite genre is people talking to each other,
Right.
I personally don't mind it. I like the additional character development, even if it's deepening something that had already been established.
Yeah.
I don't mind it, especially or I'm interested in the characters. For me, it worked, but I do get a general sense of dissatisfaction out there
Yes.
about how this is going. But for me, it's all good.
And I think this is all intentional. And I can imagine, like in a binge, giving us a very quiet episode and then something big happens would get people talking again. Of course, you can't do it every episode, or you need to, have some variability in it. So I do feel like that's what they're setting up. And then with the jewelry theft last week, they already had something there, some action there. So they probably didn't want to do too much too quickly plot wise. But I do really feel like we still know very little about what this strange dynamic between the siblings are. They really
Okay.
seem completely
But I was
sidelined.
relieved about that. So
I agree with that. But at the same time, I also feel like they were pretty sidelined in this episode. So
agree.
the one thing that does move forward, and definitely we needed the space for perhaps, is to spend more time, which I enjoy, with Rick and Chelsea. But I feel like we need more time for that, for us to see what that relationship is, to figure out what's really going on with Rick, to see these different aspects, this kind of desperation that Rick is feeling, regardless of presenting this stoic appearance, the mystery of what Greg and Gary is, and letting that unfold more slowly. That I'm fine with. I just feel like the rest of the dynamic, I could have had one more scene last week and I would get the same thing that I get. We spent a whole episode with them just inching forward with their plots.
Yeah, from a storytelling perspective, I have to agree with you. And I also noticed there are a lot of kind of just long shots of scenery here,
Yeah. Mhm.
which are beautiful, but it does feel kind of like, yeah, I get the idea. It's a beautiful place there in Thailand. Gotcha. Like, I'm not sure we need all of those extended shots of scenery,
Other
although I
than
do
the,
enjoy them.
I did too, actually. But the other than the tsunami scene at the beginning, we don't have that real sense of dread that we saw last week, where we have these shots of the empty spaces there, the villa deserted at night, and bobbing out in the water, seeing the villa from a great distance. So there are these kind of almost mysterious shots that come from a point of view that is outside the scope of the show, lend some creepiness to the show. In episode 2, we definitely didn't get that. Like you mentioned, we saw more of just these kind of touristy shots of the area, which once again, I like it just as context setting, like, if we're going to be out and about in these locations, we should get a little more of a feel for them. And of course, it's just beautiful to look at. But I don't mind that so much. I really felt more that if you think about like every scene counts, like I agree that I like these conversations between these characters. If you think about how every one of them evolves the character in some way, I didn't really feel that. Hearing the ladies once again try to get Lori to hook up with Valentine. Maybe she hooks up with him in the next episode or the one after that, or at least makes some kind of move. Just hearing the same conversation again didn't really move things forward. And having Kate in the crossfire of their toxic dynamic, I'm like, I just assume that's happening already. I don't know. I got that much more out of seeing it.
I understand your point, and I don't disagree with you. I just enjoy it for what it is, so it doesn't bother me. But I do think as I scroll through Reddit or whatever and see different little headlines about White Lotus, I think this show's mythology has kind of become bigger than itself
Sure.
in a way that, and we kind of talked about this idea in Severance as well, where I think I don't click these for reasons we've talked about before, that I don't want to go down that rabbit hole and be influenced. But like, I think people are coming up with increasingly far-fetched theories
Oh,
about
yeah.
what's going on with these characters and why they're doing the things they're doing. And I think people are seeing it as a murder mystery in a way that it really isn't.
Right.
It's kind of a show
Yes.
where somebody happens to end up dead as like
Right.
the thing that drives the plot, but it really isn't a murder mystery. Does that make sense?
You are 100% correct that the first White Lotus, and maybe that wasn't even intentional that would be the formula until the second one,
Right.
that never was that you're here to solve a murder mystery. But he's playing with this, right? Mike White is very much intentionally giving you different possible motivations for murder. And then almost certainly the way the death happens at the end will be a surprise to the audience, right? And it works, right? That is part of what drives the audience to come back, is to try to play that game of who's going to die and how. But you're absolutely correct. Sitting here trying to deeply analyze people's motivations to solve the murder mystery is not what the show even cares about.
Right. But so I think, to bring this full circle, and I understand this is different than the point you were making, I think there's kind of a general dissatisfaction because the murder mystery isn't moving forward enough for people.
Right. Yes.
But then I feel like, from my perspective, the point of the show is the dark inner lives of these people, and the idea that any of them could end up dead because of their circumstances, right? But not so much about the exact thing that happens, because in both of the prior seasons, the exact thing that happens to actually cause the death of the person is very random, right? Like, it's not really something that you could predict.
Exactly. And that's, I think, the point of those shows for sure. And I assume it'd be the same thing here.
Right. I assume so as well.
That's always where I always feel like you're better off not overanalyzing these things. I'm just talking about the experience of necessary this episode feels.
Yeah, I understand that.
And all of that being said, by the way, this episode in the context of the whole thing, right? Like, we haven't seen the whole thing, the shape of the whole thing. So for example, let's say something really shocking happens in the next episode. This episode makes perfect sense because it is a breath before that happens.
The quiet before the storm.
Exactly. So we haven't seen that, right? So it is hard to shape it, to say it's good or bad without that additional context. The episode, in my viewing of it, I felt like they didn't do enough. They needed to have a couple more really strong scenes between those other characters to make this feel like an important episode for the show, or an essential episode.
I get that.
I still enjoy it. I'm still curious about this, and obviously want to see one of the things, even at its lowest common denominator, want to see who ends up dead at the end. But there's already mysteries that I'm very curious about, mostly around, it's from a character perspective, love the Rick and Chelsea relationship. And very curious to see what happens with Belinda and Greg's identity being revealed. So there's definitely plenty to see here. Compared to the other seasons, I was a little more engaged with, specifically season 2. I was definitely more engaged with those characters than I am with most of the characters here in this show at this point. It's not always going to be perfect every time. I understand that.
I agree. And I wonder too if it is a little bit of rose-colored glasses,
Sure.
maybe there was an episode in season 2 where we felt the same thing. I just don't remember.
Right. Yeah, that's the other thing too, is like going down that rabbit hole of watching the show the right way is such a problem because I know, speaking about how people don't remember the experience of another show, obviously we're covering here, which is Severance, where Severance was a very slow patient show that paid off everything towards the end of season 1. And season 2 is action packed as far as I'm concerned. And you hear, it's probably a minority at this point, but after even episode 3 and 4, people like another episode where nothing happens. I'm like, nothing happens. What do you expect to happen on this show? I don't understand. You know more about what's happening on the show than you've had in the entirety of the show up until this point. And people's like, nothing happened. I'm like, oh, okay. If nothing happened in this episode, then nothing happened in the entirety of season 1. Like, I don't understand. But like you said, people's remembrance of the experience of like, wow, I can't believe how that paid off at the end. That's not their memory of it. Anyway, so yeah, it's a fool's errand to try to watch a show the right way. You just try to watch it as best you can and appreciate it as best you can.
Totally agree.
Yeah, and still an incredible achievement that Mike White directs all these episodes, writes all these episodes. So it's all coming from one author. And I do appreciate that. There's a lot to be said for having a really good creative writer's room. You think about a show as dense and layered as Severance is, for example, you need to have many people trying to puzzle out all those different elements, the design and the characters and all those different characters and all the layers of the symbolism. That's a very big job. But there's something also to be said for someone who's basically authoring this entire thing. It's coming out of his head. He is going to write every episode, every line of dialogue, every character invented by him. It's his internal world 100%. So that is still something really impressive to think that someone's doing that. And of course, what's he trying to tell us in all of this as well? But we will be halfway through the season next week. And I do think it's going to be quite an eventful week.
I agree.
Right. On the show, everybody, a couple of show notes. Sona, we're at 80 YouTube subscribers. It is slowing down, though. It's trickling in now. If you haven't subscribed yet, the numbers are going to be slower now. So, but do check out the link in the show notes. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. When we get to 100, we'll have a video episode of some kind. Of course, Paradise wraps up tomorrow, and it's probably going to be a big deal. It's been growing every week, this show. So I think, and they renewed it for a second season. So that I'm pretty sure it's going to end on a cliffhanger, which I hate, but we'll see how it all turns out. And of course, Severance, we have 3 Sona this week and 2 more. So
wow.
Getting so close to the end of Severance season 2 as well. And I have a feeling this week of Severance, after last week, is going to be another huge episode.
I will brace myself. I wasn't prepared for the intensity of last week. So
indeed, I thought it was going to be a quiet episode. It was quite intense and an information dump as well. So maybe we needed a nice quiet episode of The White Lotus with such a noisy set of episodes probably coming this week from the other 2 shows. And then Sona, I'll only have to do 2 episodes a week. All right. Thanks again for the conversation.
Thank you. Talk to you later.
Talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye.